Hello everyone, and welcome to The Painting Paladin. My name is Justin, and this is the 6th part in our 7-part mini-series, which means we're almost done. Now today, we'll be working on the Smurf Air Support, or known in the rulebook as the Wingets. Now these units have two different ways of fighting. The first is to circle around their enemy, dropping bombs on their foes below, and the second is to fly and charge their enemy, fighting face to face while maintaining high maneuverability. Now both of my air support flyers are designed with that close combat role in mind. So with that being said, let's head to our work desk and get started, shall we? Alright, now before we begin, I undercoated these models with gray Seer spray. Now I'm going to be painting each of these hummingbirds a different set of colors to give them a little bit of diversity. So the first color I'm going to be using on this model is Wraithbone, and that's to paint his belly as well as some small detail work around the eyes. Next, I'm going to be dry brushing some Gorthor Brown on the parts that we just painted with that Wraithbone. Now if you're not familiar with dry brushing, it's a technique where you load your brush up with paint, wipe most of it off until only a little remains, and lightly brush it over the surface of the model in the area you want to paint so that it catches only the raised bits. Moving on, the next color that we're going to be using is Stormhost Silver, and that's to paint the hummingbird's body, avoiding the areas that we just painted with the Wraithbone, as well as the little feathered section of the wings there. Alright, the next thing we're going to paint is the section of the wing that has the large feathers on it, and the color we're going to use for this is the contrast paint, Skeleton Horde. Now just make sure when painting the wings that you get both sides of the feathers. Moving on, the next color that we're going to be using is the contrast paint, Warp Lightning, and that's to paint the top of the hummingbird's back. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is paint most of the hummingbird's body, as well as that small section of wing there, and the color we're going to use for this is the contrast paint, Plaguebearer's Flesh. Now just take your time and take care to avoid the head area because we're going to be painting that a different color. Alright, now the next thing we're going to do is paint the head of the hummingbird, and the color we're using for this is actually a mix of two different contrast paints. The first one is using 3 parts of Magos Purple and 1 part of Blood Angel's Red. Now when painting this, it helps to have a reference picture on hand so you know where you're going to be painting this on the head. Moving on, the next color that we're going to be using is Abaddon Black, and that's to paint this hummingbird's beak, eyes, legs, and tail feathers. Now when painting the tail feathers, it helps to stagger the lines so that it has a more organic look to it. With that last step finished, this hummingbird is done, and we can move on to the next hummingbird. Moving on to the second hummingbird, the first color that we're going to be using for this is Stormhost Silver, but this time we're going to paint the entire hummingbird with this. Once that Stormhost Silver is dry, we can move on to our next color, and that's going to be Talassar Blue. Now just like before, we're going to use this color to paint some detail work around the eyes, as well as the hummingbird's belly. The next thing we're going to do is paint the tail of the hummingbird, and the color we're using for this is actually a 50-50 mix of Talassar Blue and Magos Purple. Now the reason we did this is because the Talassar Blue by itself is pretty dark, so that Magos Purple helps break it up a little. The next color that we're going to use is Magos Purple, and that's to paint the large feathers on the wings. Now when painting the wings, just make sure you get both sides of the feathers. The next color that we're going to use is Warp Lightning, and that's to paint the small feathers on the wings as well as the rump of the hummingbird there. Once the Warp Lightning is dry, we can move on to our next color, and that's going to be Terradon Turquoise. And we're going to use this to paint the rest of the body. The next color that we're going to use is Rhinox Hide, and that's to paint the hummingbird's legs and feet. Moving on, the next color that we're going to use is Abaddon Black, and that's to paint this hummingbird's beak and eyes. With that Abaddon Black dried, this hummingbird is finished and we can move on to painting the riders. Now the first color we're going to use for painting the rider is Baharroth Blue, and that's going to be used on all the exposed skin areas there. The next color that we're going to be using is Guilliman Blue Glaze, and that's just going to be applied right on over that Baharroth Blue. Now when applying this, watch out for any pooling, but if you do get pools, just use the tip of your brush to soak them up. Moving on, the next color that we're going to use is Gray Seer, and this is just going to be applied on the Smurf's hat, pants, and boots. Now the reason why we're applying this again is to guarantee that we have a smooth and even layer in case the spray had missed anything, as well as to tidy up any of those mistakes we might have made so far. The next color that we're going to use is the contrast paint, Apothecary White, and that's just going to be applied right on over all that Gray Seer. Next, we're going to use the paint Steel Legion Drab, to paint the shaft of the spear. The next thing we're going to do is paint the tip of the spear, and the color we're using for this is Leadbelcher. Alright, once that Leadbelcher is dry, the next color that we're going to use is Nuln Oil, and that's just to give a wash on the Smurf spear there. Now with both the riders and hummingbirds finished, these models are ready to be based. Now I'm going to be basing them the same way as the rest of my army, as seen in the first video, the Smurf Spearman. Alright, with these two units based, they can join the rest of the army. Now final preparations for the upcoming march and battles are being completed, and all that remains is for their general to join them. Now a few things to remember when painting these miniatures. The first is when painting something that's based on something, it helps to use reference pictures. I myself referenced two different types of hummingbirds for this project and had their pictures printed in front of me. The second is to plan your colors out ahead of time so you know what color you're going to use and where to use it. And the lastly, as always, is take your time to avoid any mistakes. But if you make any mistakes, you can always go back to your previous colors and correct it. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want to stay up to date with future videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thanks everyone.